Hey y'all. So, spaced these out by a couple days this time, but we are going to be talking about future Ant-Man today, or as I'm probably going to refer to him to avoid saying future Ant-Man or Ant-Man future every single time, Zane, since that is his character's name. This doesn't always stick, and maybe I'll abandon it in the future, but for now that's what I'm going with. Anyway, talking about his base stats real quick, they're solid. I think his prestige is around the 10th area, so higher than Cassie, but also not really making huge moves. Pretty solid health pool. Um, we move into strengths. So he is, I think, only the second time we've ever used Disintegration, the first being Punisher 2099. It's a very cool effect. It's a damage type that no one is immune to, and it also affects ability power rate. So, very cool, and we will see some more of that. He is definitely a control character. I already mentioned Punisher 2099 being the other character with Disintegrate. Zane definitely plays significantly differently from Punisher, but there are some clear through lines. You can manipulate your opponent's power a bit, you're going to be doing damage to them, but the big thing is often trying to keep them from gaining the power at all in the first place. This is particularly nice because I think we only have one character with any real resistance to this effect in Icarus. He has something about his combat power rate not being able to be messed with, but it's conspicuously not power drain and not power burn. So you can choose to play him in a way that doesn't trigger those abilities against certain characters or nodes with resistance or immunity and or punishment for those abilities, and you still have some method of power control because they're not gaining the power in the first place. So really strong ability in that light. His Nano-Armor Ups are very interesting. They are effectively armor ups. They will prevent Havoc's detonation. They will trigger nodes like chitinous thorns that look for the presence of armor ups. They're hooked into that whole ecosystem, but they're also their own thing, and they cause glancing. It's a relatively low chance per armor up, but I'm just getting that out of the way. He's going to be annoying. We'll talk about that a bit later. So, weaknesses, like I said, a lot of his strength comes from trying to prevent the opponent from gaining power in the first place. Once they already have that power, whatever means through which they get it, he's going to get a lot weaker. So, keep that in mind in picking your matchups. And additionally, if you are planning on using glancing as a key part of his kit, Pierce is going to shut you down. It's only kind of going to shut you down, honestly, because you can still ramp his armor and get your damage, but it's going to be a lot harder to sit there blocking, which is often a key part of his gameplay, and so I would definitely try to avoid those effects where possible. So, we already talked about he has glancing. A certain amount of that is just in his kit. He has a 10% chance to glance all the time. And as a reminder, when an attack glances, it has minus 100% ability accuracy. It has a basically 50% weakness on it. It's supposed to do half damage, and it cannot be a critical hit. So all of those things have some knock-ons. There are abilities that trigger on critical hits that cannot trigger here. Most abilities just flat out won't work, although obviously you have some characters like Longshot or Atuma who don't necessarily mind this, and attacks will do less damage. So this is a key part of what makes him a little bit tankier. But like it says, none of his own glancing abilities are going to work at all if the opponent has an active Pierce effect. Now, right now, that's pretty much just Hulkling, Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie Relic can give this to any skill character. But as we'll talk about later, right now his true ideal counter is basically just Hulkling. So there's some space there. And we'll talk about that. So another key ability here is this power detonation. And what you have to understand is that there are a few different effects here. There is basically a dormant version of this, then there is a passive, and then when the passive ends, you get a different debuff. So 3 different stages to keep track of. The dormant one, the first stage, is this encroaching power detonation passive. By itself, this doesn't do anything. But when it expires, so after that 14-second timer, the opponent is going to be power drained, assuming they're not immune. This is another reason Hulkling is good against him. And then a power detonation passive kicks in, which means that you have 18 seconds to throw a special. Now that's a pretty decent amount of time, so this is not super limiting, but you are going to lose power before this happens, and so it is something you very much have to pay attention to. And then as soon as the power detonation passive goes away, whether it expires naturally or is removed, then the encroaching one comes right back. So that dormant version, the encroaching power detonation, is always paused unless Ant-Man is landing hits or is a defender while he's being attacked. So you can kind of think of this the way that you would in some other video game, as an ability that is paused unless like in melee, unless in combat. So you can't just idle far away from the opponent and have this trigger, right? You have to have some skin in the game for this to come into play. But once you've landed enough hits and applied the power detonation passive, the actual real thing on the opponent, now all of your hits are going to inflict an instant disintegration, which is going to cause them to deal direct damage and is going to reduce the power the opponent gets from them. So these instant disintegrations are themselves benefiting from reduced combat power rate. That's going to be additive with other sources, so be ready to keep track of a few different power modifications here. Now, if the power detonation expires naturally, then you're going to get a much longer disintegration debuff, which is going to lower his combat power rate that entire time by 15%, and it's going to deal some damage. But the damage is super spread out, and it will probably be net negative with willpower in a number of cases. So really the important thing here is the combat power rate reduction. That is going to feed into the other parts of your kit. So you basically want to make sure that you get the power detonation passive on them. You're going to wail on them as much as possible because they're going to be gaining less power, you're going to be doing more damage, and you want it to expire naturally. You don't want it to be removed by your opponent throwing a special attack, because then you're going to be able to reduce their combat power even further. And remember that as soon as the power detonation passive expires, you get the encroaching one again. And you have to be really aggressive, but that can only last for 14 seconds. And this disintegration debuff lasts for 24. So you can actually get those instant disintegrations online from having the power detonation passive on the opponent while you still have this disintegration debuff. And then you're now looking at 30% reduced combat power rate. And all of these things stack, so just keep in mind he can really start tanking the opponent's power gain. Now, the reason I said that you're probably going to have to block a lot of hits with him is because of what I just mentioned. You do not want the opponent to throw their special. And if you don't want the opponent to throw their special, you're probably going to have to do 4-hit combos and immediately block and bait out their heavies. That is just kind of the core of his loop. If you want this power detonation passive to expire naturally, as opposed to being removed when the opponent throws their special and taking away the benefit of this disintegration debuff from you, you're going to need to alter your playstyle. So, moving on to the armor ups. You start with 1, and they give you a little bit of armor. It's not a ton, and they increase your chance to glance. So you actually start with a 16% chance to glance, because remember, he has 10% just at all times. Like I said, these do count as armor up effects for everything else. So these are indefinite up to 5 while attacking. This is kind of like how Guardian's force field charges work, but note that that is while you're an attacker. On defense, you can allow these to fall off, and if you're not using a perfect counter like Hulkling, you should. That is a key part of playing around him. But on offense, you basically get to 5 and just hold them for most of the time, and then any additional ones last for 4 seconds, and they fall off one at a time, kind of like Atuma's effects or Howard the Duck's. So, even though they're only 4 seconds, if you get up to 10, then that's actually 20 seconds before you're back down to 5, right? Because each one has to go through that 4 seconds before the next one starts expiring. So you can get up to 10 of them, and they're going to be paused during either champion's special attacks, which just makes maintenance that much easier. So intercepting is going to give you 2 Nano-Armor Up buffs. That means that obviously intercepting is very helpful, but as I talked about earlier, if you are trying to keep the opponent from throwing a special while they have a bar of power, you do not want to be opening yourself up and going for intercepts. That is a fantastic way to get hit in the face with a special, or to go, oh crud, they threw a special, and then dex it safely, but now your power detonation passive is gone. Don't want that. So, the other way that you're going to ramp is hitting your opponent. This says during their heavy attack, but what that really means is during their heavy attack animation, which means that you can also hit them right after their heavy attack. The timing for this should be similar to getting ruptures from Tigra, or getting the pauses on Absorbing Man's forms from his light interrupts. So keep that in mind. Whenever a hit glances, you get another armor up buff. This one will come into play on offense as your glancing chance goes up, but this is definitely more of a defensive trigger, because if you're fighting him as a defender, hopefully you're not getting intercepted and you're not getting your heavies punished. That would be very sad. And so for the most part, his armor ups are going to be triggering when you glance. Note that because each armor up gives him a higher chance to glance, this can cascade a bit. That's why I said that you're probably going to be wanting to wait for these armor ups to fall off a lot of the times, because when he's at 0, it's a 10% chance for any of your hits to give him another one. When he's at 5, then he's up to a 40% chance to glance. When he's at 10, he's at a 70% chance to glance. So you really do not want to just keep hitting into him as he's stacking these armor ups. But of course, one of the best ways of playing around him without a true counter is intercepting him, because intercept attacks cannot glance and remove an armor up without any consequences. This, of course, means that Hercules is quite good. But it also means that skill can get around him for the most part, and there are some other characters like Elsa Bloodstone who are particularly good at intercepting who will get credit for this as well. Now, it's important to note that, again, if you do not have perfect counters and you are controlling his armor up buffs some other way, whether it's via neutralize, something like armor shatter, which is stopping them from triggering in the first place, or your armor breaking them or nullifying them, then he's going to get a passive. It's kind of like Sam Wilson in that, but more broad. And then these passives are also going to cause glancing, right? So again, you often want to wait for them to fall off if you don't have a perfect counter, because continuing to hit into him, even if you're removing the buffs, probably isn't removing the passives, and then he can keep stacking more buffs because the passives are giving him that chance to glance. So be very careful with that. Now, the reason that he, especially as an attacker, cares about building these armor ups is not just for the glance, is not just for the armor rating. It's because once you get above 5, 6 or higher, you turn on Surging Swarm. You get this big old boost of attack rating. That is definitely not supposed to be a percentage. Just calling that out. And now your encroaching power detonation expires faster. Instead of it being 14 seconds, expiring 200% faster means that it's going to be a third of that, right? Just under 5 seconds. And this is going to make it much, much easier to do that thing I talked about earlier and get your encroaching power detonation to turn into a power detonation passive while you still have disintegrations up from previous power detonation passives. And that's when you really start stacking the power control. That's when you really start doing good damage. As an attacker, this is also going to make the opponent more aggressive, making it easier to intercept so you keep stacking armor ups. But note that if they're more aggressive, they may also be more likely to throw special attacks, which can be good if you need to bait them, but also, if you're not trying to bait out the special attacks, makes it that much more important to really master that 4-hit and turtle playstyle. And then defensively, if he has Surging Swarm active, you really do not want to use your combo enders because that will stun you. It can also save you as an attacker, but definitely less often. So, a completely new ability here on his light combo enders. As long as you have more than one full bar of power, so if you have 2 or 3, then using the light combo ender actually disables the highest special you have available and lets you use the next one. So if you have 2 bars of power, you can choose to use the special 1 instead of the special 2. If you have 3 bars of power, you can choose to use the special 2 instead of the special 3. And it will still only cost the right number of bars of power, meaning that you'll still have power left over. You can literally throw 2 special ones in a row this way, if you plan it out properly. Anyway, the special 1 lands another copy of that long, low-potency disintegration debuff, which again is going to stack with the power control. You can see how if you have one of those from the power detonation passive expiring, maybe one from a special 1, and maybe another because you just threw 2 special 1s in a row thanks to the light combo ender, plus you have the power detonation passive up, you're now up to minus 15 combat power rate 4 different times, so minus 60% combat power rate. That is a huge reduction, and you could theoretically go higher. So he has, like I said, a lot of control when it comes to keeping power out of the opponent's hands in the first place. Additionally, the special 1 is going to power drain for each disintegration debuff on the opponent, so this scales with all that stuff we were just talking about, and this is also one of his few ways for actually actively removing power the opponent has, which of course makes it harder for them to throw specials and easier for you to get your combo or your power detonation passive to expire. The special 2 is going to have more instant disintegrations. They have only a 10% potency, so not quite as much combat power rate reduction as some of the other ones, but they do a big chunk of damage. This will, of course, scale with the attack bonus in Surging Swarm, and it gets even stronger for each disintegration debuff on the opponent. So if you do the thing that we were talking about a second ago and get multiple long disintegration debuffs on the opponent, get Surging Swarm active, and then throw a special 2, you could potentially be giving them 70% less power and doing absolutely massive bursts of direct damage. So this is a really, really nice payoff when everything else gets set up. The special 3, as it often is a little bit of a cheat button, for lack of a better term, on maintenance. This is just going to get you right to your max of Nano-Armor Up buffs. And you're going to get a really long 60-second disintegration debuff. This is also going to pause all of your others, and it counts as a separate effect, so it doesn't mess with the stacks for those, and this is going to let you deny your opponent even more power. So which order you go for these is kind of going to depend on the fight. Often, I think a couple special ones and a special two is going to be the way to go, but in longer fights, the control and damage that the special 3 allows you to unlock via the other specials is really, really good. So the signature ability Incoming Bleeds and Incinerate effects are up to 90% shorter. This does catch passives, such as Absorbing Man's passive Incinerates. And when any of these effects expire, which is going to catch 0 duration instant effects, including Valkyrie's Bleeds, then he's going to get a self-repair buff, giving him some of missing health. This is not super strong, because it is only up to 3% of missing health, but it's also only over 6 seconds. And so if you get a number of these triggering and a good chunk of their actual duration passes, this can definitely stack up and give you quite a bit of health back. This is also why Hulkling is his only true counter in the game right now, because you can use Valkyrie on him, but she's going to be triggering these self-repair buffs constantly once she gets ramped. She can overpower it, for sure, but it is going to be a little bit slower because of it. Additionally, he has a protection mechanic. If he would lose more than 10% of his max health from a single source other than a special 3, then the damage is capped and he gets a stronger self-repair buff. So yes, this does work on Galen's Harvest ending. That is 10% or more of his max health from a single source. I understand that this upsets a lot of people because Galen is a cosmic, but honestly, I think it's fair, especially because Galen himself punches back against Mystics, that he doesn't completely hose every single champion with armor from here until the end of time. He's still going to be good in an awful lot of places. I promise you, we will release more champions in the future that Galen is amazing against. It would be very difficult for us to not. But this one is not his prime food. There are going to be other counters for him. So, talking about synergies, this Bugspeak one is excellent. It gives him a miss counter. As we talked about, especially once you get into Surging Swarm, it's not that hard to have pretty good uptime on the power detonations, and so this can be a realistic piece of utility. Ant-Man himself, the old one, is going to get longer unsteady debuffs, giving him more glancing and access to his utility. Wasp gets extra shock debuff potency. Honestly, this one doesn't really matter. And Yellow Jacket is going to get physical vulnerability debuffs, allowing him to actually do some extra damage outside his power stings. Probably not a huge benefit for Yellow Jacket, but dude isn't going to mind extra damage. So the second one with Odin and Ultron is very good. Ant-Man is going to reduce the duration of shock effects. It's only 60%, but that is still fairly powerful. That's kind of like a medium Sig Ultron who still has uses. Odin is going to get a shock resist buff. It's kind of a weaker version of what he can give to other people with his pre-fights. Maybe for weaker effects, this is going to allow him to break even on willpower. It at least keeps him from dying as fast. And then Ultron Prime, this is the big one, gets 30% extra bleed and degen debuff duration. The reason this matters is because this isn't just 30% extra damage. Ultron, for his Cauterize effect, cares about how many bleeds and degens are active on the opponent at once, and longer effects are easier to stack, to cash in on at a single moment, and so this is going to be a really big impact on his playstyle. And then lastly, other than some generic ones, we have Cable and Bishop. So Ant-Man is going to get a very light prowess counter. He's going to get extra armor up buffs and ramp faster against prowess champions. Cable basically gets the same ability he already has for poison, where he reduces the duration of each of them until they don't apply at all after 5 of them, except this one caps at a 50% reduction, and so just makes Cable a little bit more resilient to incinerates. And then Bishop gets longer incinerates. This is very, very good, especially if you land a big special too. And that is future Ant-Man, or like I said, probably going to be calling him Zane more often. I really like this character. He is a very interesting addition to the power control sphere. Punisher 2099, I think, has been underrated for a long time. Probably will continue to be underrated, honestly. But I think Ant-Man playing in that same area, having access to some red numbers, to some extra pieces of utility, is just a really interesting thing to come along. I like playing him as an attacker quite a bit. His ceiling is really high. And then I think he's going to be a very interesting defender in Battlegrounds. He's definitely going to be an annoying one. He is the definition of a stall defender if your opponent does not have Hulkling. But I think there are ways around him, and it's going to be interesting to see what people come up with. I know I've said the word interesting a lot in this one. But hope y'all enjoyed this. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking. And until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.